Fairmont Crest, no night is ever truly quiet. There are nights when, from the outside, all you can see is the golden light spilling from luxurious penthouses, half-finished glasses of wine still resting on the table, and the wind drifting past silk curtains as if nothing serious is happening at all. But for people who have lived long enough to understand the human heart, one truth is clear. Tragedy rarely begins with a gunshot or a scream. More often, it begins with silence. And the night Lynette disappeared carried exactly that terrifying shape, a silence too polished, too spotless, too much like a carefully arranged ending rather than an unexpected accident. The question that keeps people from looking away is not only whether Lynette is alive or dead, but what truly happened between her and Randy in those final moments before she vanished. Something so decisive that everything afterward changed direction. If you look at Lynette's nature, her tragedy does not lie in the fact that she was the cruelest person in the room, but in the fact that she believed she was always the smartest. She lived by the feeling that she understood other people's weaknesses, knew exactly when to tighten her grip, when to loosen it, and when to act indifferent just enough to make the other person panic. A woman like that usually does not die because she lacks weapons. She dies because she trusts her advantage too much. Lynette once saw Bill as nothing more than a walking wallet, thought Hayley was only a weak wife who could be pushed into a passive corner. And perhaps her greatest mistake was believing Randy was just another pawn she could control with charm, ambiguity, and promises that were half true and half false. But Randy is not the kind of foolish man who can be led by emotion alone. What makes him dangerous is that he always appears to be improvising, while underneath he is the kind of man who can think 3 steps ahead the moment he feels cornered. That is why the night Lynette disappeared cannot be viewed as an ordinary missing person case. It has to be seen as the result of a psychological duel in which both of them believed they had the upper hand, but only one of them was allowed to step out of the darkness. What makes this story so chilling is that the so-called dangerous one-night encounter was not romantic at all. It was closer to a negotiation through bodies than true intimacy. Lynette may have used it as a final way to bind Randy to a shared secret, to make him her emotional accomplice before turning him into a real one. A woman who has always lived through control understands very well the power of guilt and obligation after intimacy. She may have believed that if she drew Randy close enough, he would no longer be clear-headed enough to resist her. But that is also exactly where Randy's survival instinct would rise with the greatest force. A man who has already gone to foreign schemes with Hayley would understand that one moment of softness could bring an entire chain of lies crashing down. If Lynette demanded more than money, more than silence, more than the right to step into the forbidden territory Hayley had worked so hard to keep hidden, then for Randy that night was no longer a dangerous game. It became the moment of choosing between allowing Lynette to keep manipulating everything or cutting off the thread himself before she could deliver a fatal strike. That is why the theory that Randy acted against her is not the most shocking theory at all. The more shocking possibility is that he may have prepared for it in advance. Men like Randy never begin with the intention to kill. They begin with the intention to control a situation. But when that situation slips beyond their reach, when the other person knows too much, demands too much, and especially when that person is no longer afraid of them, control can very easily slide into destruction. If Lynette believed she was holding the advantage that night, if she carried messages, evidence, or threats strong enough to force Randy into submission, then all it would take was one look. One sentence, one movement out of rhythm, and everything could plunge into the abyss. A shove during a struggle, a moment of panic with hands tightening around a throat, a fall that seemed accidental before quickly being transformed into a spotless scene. For a man driven into a corner, the line between self-defense and intention can become terrifyingly thin. And because it is so thin, it becomes even easier for him to convince himself that he had no other choice. But if Randy truly did act against her, the most frightening thing is not the act itself, but what may have happened afterward. A person can commit violence in panic, But not everyone is cold enough to clean up a scene. Only those who are both terrified and deeply aware of the value of evidence can do that. So the real question is not whether Randy was ruthless enough to make Lynette disappear. The question is whether he was calm enough to erase himself from that night. And here, I believe that no matter how clever Randy may be, he would still struggle to avoid one small mistake. It could be a deleted text message that still exists in a backup system. It could be a midnight phone call that he forgot was recorded by a nearby cell tower. It could be a hallway camera everyone assumed was broken, but which still captured a few flickering frames. Or it could simply be a witness who has said nothing so far, a late-night server, a driver, or a security guard who saw Lynette walk in far too confidently and never walk out in the same way. In stories like this, collapse does not begin with a major piece of evidence. It begins with one tiny detail that the liar forgot to guard against. That is also why Hayley now stands at the center of a fear even greater than she may realize. She may have thought Randy was helping her get rid of a threat. She may have believed he was only scaring Lynette, cutting off her path back in, or at most hiding her somewhere until the storm died down. But if Lynette is truly dead, then Hayley has already stepped into a far darker world. Instead of being merely a woman trying to conceal suspicious connections, she suddenly becomes someone who may be forced to live beside a killer she is too afraid to expose. That is a form of psychological imprisonment far worse than any blackmail that came before. Lynette could still bargain. Lynette could still be predicted. But Randy, if he has truly crossed that line, would become the kind of man even Hayley may no longer be able to understand. And that is the most painful psychological layer of Hayley's role in this story. Her fear would not come the instant Lynette disappeared. At first, it might only feel like relief. The feeling that she could finally breathe, that the late-night phone calls had stopped, that the shameless demands had ended, that she no longer had to pile one lie on top of another. But that relief would quickly be replaced by a coldness running down her spine when she began to realize that everything had become too quiet. Lynette was never the kind of woman who would simply let go. If she has gone silent, then either she is no longer able to speak, or she is quietly preparing a counterattack large enough to bring everyone down in one single blow. For someone like Hayley, not knowing the truth can sometimes be even more terrifying than knowing it. She would begin to look at Randy differently, no longer as an ally, no longer as someone close who shared the same secrets, but as a danger, someone who knows too much and may be capable of too much. That is exactly why the possibility that Lynette is not dead makes this story even more compelling in the true spirit of Beyond the Gates. A greedy, arrogant, but fiercely stubborn woman like Lynette may very well have chosen to disappear in order to force her enemies into revealing themselves. If she is still alive, that disappearance may be the smartest counterstrike she has ever made. Because once people believe she is dead, Randy will lower his guard, Hayley will lose her sense of direction, and Bill will start connecting irregularities he once ignored because he still trusted his wife. If Lynette returns at just the right moment, armed with a recording, a photograph, a transfer history, or simply a statement delivered at exactly the right place, she could destroy every alliance within minutes. And if that happens, the first person to collapse may not even be Randy. It may well be Hayley, because emotionally she is the weakest link. Randy can deny, Lynette can perform. But Hayley is the kind of person whose truth will show in her eyes, in her panic, in one reckless decision that looks like self-preservation but actually drags the secret straight to the surface. In this entire picture, Bill may be the most important figure to watch, even if he is not yet the most aggressive one. Men like Bill usually do not realize right away that they are being betrayed, because they are used to trusting in their own power. But once suspicion begins, they review everything at a completely different speed. Every explanation from Hayley, every gap in time, every small shift in Randy's behavior can become another piece of the puzzle. And what gives this tragedy such weight is not simply whether Bill will uncover the truth, but what he will understand once he does. He will realize he was turned into something inside this game. Not merely a man exploited for money or marriage, but someone standing in the middle of a web of lies dirty enough to lead to a disappearance, perhaps even murder. When a man who believed he controlled his family discovers that he has actually been the one most thoroughly blinded, his reaction will not be mere anger. It will be the need to crush everyone who made him look foolish. That is why the true ending of the night Lynette disappeared may not belong to Lynette at all. It belongs to the illusion that Randy and Hayley still have control of the situation. If Lynette is dead, that death will not stay buried. It will rot its way through every relationship, stealing Hayley's sleep, leaving Randy exhausted from constant vigilance, and driving Bill to follow every crack with growing coldness. And if Lynette is not dead, then her return will no longer be the return of a small-time blackmailer. It will be the reappearance of a woman pushed into a place where she has nothing left to lose, and people like that are always the most dangerous. So the final question is not whether Lynette is truly dead. The real question is who began dying silently after that night. It may be Randy, as every small piece of evidence becomes a blade hanging above his head. It may be Hayley, when she realizes her greatest fear is no longer somewhere in the past but sitting right beside her. And it may be both of them, because at Fairmont Crest, not every buried secret agrees to stay underground. Some secrets only wait for the right moment to rise, dragging down the very people who once believed they were clever enough to escape. That is why the night Lynette disappeared does not feel like an ending. It feels like the moment a still lake suddenly goes silent just before the real storm breaks. If you have better ideas or more interesting theories, share them in the comments so everyone can discuss them together. I truly appreciate every contribution and all of your support. Thank you so much. And if you have not followed us yet, scroll down and hit the subscribe button.